So at this point, I feel like my animation, I got some of the details worked out, but I really think that I'm really treating this like a proof of concept. This was kind of a first crack at the animation just to work out the concepts, to familiarize myself with what my options and my tools are, and I have a better sense of how to execute this animation at this point. If I give this just a real quick test render, this would be a very boring animation. It's a little short. It's just one bounce. There's no materials. There's no lighting, and even though I have a really rough curve in here, even the path which the ball is bouncing across isn't really clean. It's a little rough. There's some tweaking in the path that I have to do. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to start this whole animation over, and I'm going to start with a completely empty scene, and I'm going to rethink this based on lighting, based on the environment, and based on the kind of animation that I want to create, and potentially even the time that the animation is going to take, and I'll throw a few new things in there. So what I'm going to do is rather than reverse engineering the animation that I have and fixing some of the issues that I have, I'm just going to create a new document. I'm going to Command N or File New, and just to get a sense of scale, I'm going to introduce my sphere. Now, I know that I want the segmentation bumped up for my sphere, so I'm not going to change the size, but I'm going to double the segmentation. And I'm going to start off with a simple material. And I'm going to name my material ball, and I think I want a red ball. I'll say OK. And I'm actually going to make it slightly reflective. Now, I'll pay the price for render times here with with materials and reflectivity, and so I may turn these on and off as I go. But I know that I want a little bit more character. I'm going to keep my object manager organized as well. So I'm going to take the sphere, and as I create content, I'll name it appropriately. So I have my ball, and I will apply the red material to it. So now I have a sphere. This is going to be the star of my animation, and I want to start to think a little bit about the stage. Now, the way that I'm going to create the stage is rather than just taking a cube like I did the first time and slapping it in as the ground plane, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a seamless. Okay, so I'm going to build basically a big kind of like a half pipe for skateboarders, or a big curtain, so that I don't have a room that this thing is sitting in. I'm just going to experiment with this concept that will kind of define the environment, but it won't have a hard edge to the corner. And I'll show you what I mean here in just a second. So I'm going to split out my view because I want to be a little precise about this. I'm going to focus on the right view. Now, I don't really like so much working in this line mode, so I'm going to display. I'm going to choose the display pull-down menu, and I'm going to choose constant shading with lines. That gives me slightly more information. Now, what I want to do is I want to build a spline that starts somewhere over here and kind of wraps down and has a bend in the floor and then kind of heads out this way. Okay, so I'm going to go up under the spline menu, and I'm going to experiment with a couple of different splines. I could do this with freehand. I could do it with this Akima or Bezier. Bezier is very similar to the pen tool in Illustrator, but I'm going to try the B-spline. B-spline is kind of cool. You can always experiment with this. It's just a point and click to draw lines. So always experiment with these splines before you get started, or don't be afraid to make a few mistakes along the way. I have the B-spline tool selected, and the way I'll get started is I'm just paying attention to my grid here, and I'm going to click one time, I'll click 2 times, and 3 times, and then I'm just really kind of paying attention to where the ground plane is. So I'm pretty much going like 3 grid blocks down and 3 grid blocks over, and I'll fine tune these as I go, and then more or less just a straight line. Okay, so that is kind of the curve that I'm looking for. The B-spline really allowed me to do that really quickly without having to mess around with the Bezier handles that I would find in some of the other tools. And what I'll do is I'll just take these last points, and I could be really precise if I wanted to, but I'm just going to kind of move these around a little bit. So I'll extend that in terms of the scale of this thing. And I can always go back and tweak this a bit, but I'm not going to over-design it. So that's kind of the profile shape that I want to create. Now, this is just a spline, so I'm not getting a whole lot of mileage out of this at this point. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this object, I'm going to go find the extrude NURBS, which I can find just underneath this little green icon here. I'll click and hold. I'm going to choose the extrude NURBS, and I'll take that spline and I'll drop it into the extrude NURBS. Now, if I go back to the perspective view, okay, not a whole lot has happened. It actually, you know, did a little something or other, but if I take that extrude NURBS, this is X, this is Y, this is Z. I do not want to extrude it along the Z axis, so I'm going to zero out that value. I'm going to go to movement along X, and I'll extrude this, let's say, by 100 just to get started. And my path got a little strange when I had a zero extrusion on it, but I'm not going to worry about it. So it is extruding in the right direction, and so I'll say, let's make that 1,000. That's still clearly not enough. Let me make it 10,000. Wow, that's huge. Let's make it 5,000. Oops, not 500, but 5,000. So that's a pretty good start. Maybe I'll even bump it up to 7,000. So relative to the ball. So that's a pretty good start. I'll take that extrude NURBS, that whole object now. I can consider that to be my seamless background. I can tweak this if I need to. But now if I zoom way in on this thing, and once I compose my shot and I render, now I have effectively a room in this environment that does not have a hard edge to it. I can play around with some of the lighting. Now this is just an option. I'm just throwing this out there. Not that there's anything wrong with a hard edge, but for those of you that are photographers, you might appreciate the concept of building a simple photo studio in a 3D environment and being able to introduce something like a seamless. So that's a decent start. The next thing that I'm going to do is I want to apply a simple material to my seamless. So I'll call this seamless material. The color of it, I'll just let it default to whatever the color is. I can always change it later. And just a simple white or gray, light gray, and I'll apply that. So now that's the environment that I have. My lighting is pretty darn awful at this point, and so I will introduce really quickly some basic lighting, and I'll experiment with a couple of things. Now, the lighting that I'm going to introduce is I'm going to introduce slightly more sophisticated lights. I'm going to very quickly set up a sort of three-point light. So the kind of light that I'm going to get started with first is going to be an area light. So I'm choosing lights, choosing area light, and I'm just going to orbit around so I get a better sense of where this thing's getting started. And I'm moving it in front of the subject. I'm going to move it up a little bit and off to one side, and then I'll redirect that area light. The area light points along the direction of Z, and so I'll just give that a little rotation so it's pointing directly at my sphere. I'll point it down a little bit. That looks pretty good. Okay, I'll go back to the move tool. With the light selected, I'll probably change the size of this light a little bit, and I can do that as long as I'm in the use model mode, which I inadvertently was clicking on some other stuff over here when I made the seamless. As long as I'm in use model mode and I have the move tool selected, I can just grab these little handlebars and I'll make that light a little bit bigger. Okay, so right now I'm currently using an area light. It's going to be a little too intense at 100%, but the shadows I'm going to set to area, and I'll just give that a quick render and see what I got. So that's my first light in the scene. It's doing its trick. It's doing what it's supposed to do. I'll add a little bit of color to that light. I'll make it less intense, and I'll tweak some of the lighting setup, and then I'll introduce some more information, and I'll do that in the next presentation.